Pochwalony Jezus Chrystus. Pozdrawiam serdecznie wszystkich członków ruchu Światło-Życie.
Praised be our Lord Jesus Christ. Good afternoon. I would like to greet with all my heart all the members of the Light Life movement gathered at the Parousia International Meeting in many countries in Europe and worldwide. Today, I want to share some insight into what we mean in the Light Life movement when we use the phrase living in the light, which is the keynote of our formation this year, and how we are to live in the light.
Tego wyrażenia życie w świetle bardzo często używał założyciel naszego ruchu, ksiądz Franciszek Blachnicki.
The founder of our movement, Father Francis Blachnicki, used the phrase living in the light very often, particularly during the last years of his life in Carlsberg, Germany. Several months ago, the Central Diaconia for Unity decided that the phrase living in the light would become the theme of the formation year 2022-2023 in our movement. What does it mean to live in the light? First of all, it means to live in communion with God. Theology calls such life living in the sanctifying grace. However, Father Francis Blachnicki seldom used that theological term. Instead, he substituted it with other phrases, like living in the freedom of the children of God, or just living in the light. However, he was aware that we have to remain in sanctifying grace all the time. In other words, we must preserve that fundamental communion with God, in which no mortal sin separates us from Him, and we strive to fulfill His gospel.
Mówił to do pierwszych oazowiczów, młodych chłopców, że chrześcijanin nie może być jak żaba, która to jest to stworzenie, które
At the beginning of his service, as a young priest, Father Francis used to tell the first light lifers, young boys, that a Christian must not resemble a frog. A frog spends almost all its life in a swamp, in some backwater area. Only from time to time does it stick its head over the mud to see how beautiful God's world is, and then dives back into the swamp. Father Blachnicki used that example to encourage all the participants of the Oasis retreats to go to confession before the retreats so that they were in a state of sanctifying grace. That state is the starting point for deepening one's spiritual life. That is the foundation. We should oppose the way of thinking in which we put off reconciliation with God to the very end of a retreat and think that maybe later I will reconcile with God when I experience something. No, it must be the starting point. Living in sanctifying grace, in communion with God, must be the basis, the foundation of our formational journey.
Trzeba powiązać to wyrażenie z tematem krucjaty wyzwolenia człowieka. Jest on założycielem krucjaty wyzwolenia człowieka, która miała być taką inicjatywą, takim dziełem, takim nawet ruchem, nawet szerszym od ruchu Światło-Życie, który miał wszystkim.
In my opinion, when we speak about living in the light, as Father Francis understood it, we should also refer to the crusade for human liberation, the crusade for the liberation of man. Father Blachnicki is the founder of the crusade for human liberation. He wanted it to be an initiative, a work, or even a movement broader than the Light Life movement. At the same time, he wanted it to become an initiative accompanying all those who identified with the life charism. However, as Father Blachnicki intended, the crusade for human liberation does not consist only in abstaining from alcoholic beverages, even though alcoholism is still a severe issue in Poland. Father Francis was convinced that alcoholism was not the only problem in society. He saw that there were many other threats. He saw that people must become liberated from many other enslavements, from many other vices that destroy communion with God and conflict with human dignity. It is symptomatic that when Father Blachnicki spoke about the aims of the formation of the Light Life movement in the last years of his life, in one of his presentations, he explicitly indicated what is his opinion are 4 basic characteristics of a contemporary person. Firstly, consumerism, which is an excessive focus on material matters, often connected with neglecting spiritual issues. Secondly, some internal crisis of a person when they know what they should do because of their reasons suggest what is good. However, they are not able to do it because they are helpless while facing their weaknesses, internally broken, disintegrated. The third characteristic Father Francis indicated is an excessive desire for achieving success. Contemporary people want to succeed, at least in a narrow sphere, only to be better than others. It often results in some spiritual paralysis or some lack of integral growth of a person. And finally, the fourth characteristic of modern people Father Blachnicki spoke about is the vulnerability to manipulation, particularly by mass media. So, in my opinion, we may think about the crusade for human liberation as a means to oppose such attitudes by creating the new culture, which is a way of living of God's children, living according to the gospel. And of course, in various countries around the world, we may see some differences. But I think the diagnosis of Father Blachnicki is still valid, even though it was given 40 years ago. The 4 characteristics he spoke and wrote about still make us far from or incapable of living the life God wants us to live.
One ciągle powodują, że jesteśmy dalecy, czy nie potrafimy żyć takim życiem, jakiego Bóg dla nas pragnie. Ale żeby nie mówić tylko od strony negatywnej, pokazując braki współczesnego człowieka, to ksiądz Blachnicki często mówił o tym, kogo mamy naśladować, albo w jaki sposób mamy naśladować.
But let us not speak negatively only by indicating what modern people lack. Father Blachnicki often told us whom we should imitate and how to do it. He also often used a phrase from the Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World of the Second Vatican Council, paragraph 24, which states that a person cannot fully find themselves except through a sincere gift of themselves, that is, through selfless love, through serving others. Father Blachnicki repeated that phrase from the Constitution and referred to it very often. He used to say, it is the example to follow, and it indicates the attitude which summarizes the aim that we pursue. But of course, he also spoke about what we should imitate, particularly about Mary Immaculate, who shows us most fully what it means to live in the light and how to implement the ideal of selfless service to God and other people in our lives. Today, when I am speaking to you, and it is March the 4th, 2022, we have the war in Ukraine. which was attacked by Russia.
wojnę na Ukrainie,
People from the Light Life movement in
została
Poland,
napadnięta
which is Ukraine's
przez
neighbor,
Rosjan.
genuinely have an opportunity
Ludzie ruchu
or
Światło-Życie
are even
w
called to
Polsce,
bear
która
the
sąsiaduje z
testimony or
Ukrainą,
helping the refugees
mają
coming to Poland in
rzeczywiście
great numbers.
wielką możliwość
Already
i
hundreds of
okazję,
thousands of
są
refugees from
wezwani wręcz, bym
Ukraine
tak powiedział, do
arrived
dawania
in the very
świadectwa
first week of the
pomocy
war,
uchodźcom,
and a lot of good is already
których
happening.
napływa do Polski
I learn about
bardzo
people from the
wiele,
Light Life
setki
movement
tysięcy już
who organize
po
help for the
tygodniu
refugees,
agresji Rosji
collect goods
uchodźców z
necessary
Ukrainy
for
jest
them to
podstęp.
live,
I już,
food, clothes, and seek
dzieje się
places to live
bardzo wiele
for them
dobra.
in Poland. The
Mam
refugees
sygnały o
are mainly women and
ludziach z ruchu
children,
Światło-Życie,
totally
którzy
innocent
organizują
victims of the
pomoc dla
war.
uchodźców.
I learn about
Zbierają
people
dla
who
nich,
raise money and
środki,
help in many other ways,
do
and in
przetrwania,
all these
artykuły
ways
żywnościowe,
bear witness to
ubrania,
how a Christian may live in the light.
mieszkania w Polsce, żeby mogli zamieszkać. To są najczęściej kobiety z dziećmi.
Thus,
Niewinne
we can
zupełnie
see that
ofiary tej
what I
wojny,
spoke about should
którzy
not
organizują
remain on the level
zbiórkę
of theoretical
pieniężną, na
deliberations.
różne inne sposoby
It must be our
pomagają
response to
w
the
tej
life
sytuacji.
situation God gives
Dają
us,
właśnie
to what
takie
is around us.
świadectwo,
So
jak
here are my
służyć
wishes for
chrześcijanin
all
może
the
żyć
people who
świetnie.
identify
Bo
with the Light
to,
Life
co
charism worldwide.
mówiłem
May
przez
your
prawie
engagement
całą
in
tą moją
various
wypowiedź,
apostolic initiatives,
to
in
nie ma być
multiple
tylko
acts of love for
teoretyczne
God and
rozważanie,
neighbor,
ale to ma
make
być
you people
odpowiedź na
about whom
sytuacje,
someone will say in the
których Pan Bóg
future,
nastawia, na
they live
sytuacje,
in
które
the
są
light.
wokół nas. Także życzę wszystkim, którzy identyfikują się z charyzmatem światło życie na całym świecie, aby poprzez podejmowanie różnych zadań apostolskich, różnych czynów
These are my
miłości
heartfelt
Boga i
wishes for
bliźnich,
all of you.
byli ludźmi, o
My
których
best
ktoś
greetings
kiedyś
to
powie, że
everyone.
żyją w świetle.
God bless you.
Tego serdecznie Wam wszystkim życzę i Was pozdrawiam. Szczęść Boże!